I just want to give a very brief introduction, and then I'll hand the floor over to Chris. I met Chris through Echoing Green, which is a venture philanthropy that invests in social entrepreneurs. It makes like angel investments, trying to write the first check on a really risky idea. And I serve on the selection committee for this venture philanthropy. I read Chris's fellowship application, and when I read it, I knew he was going to get it, because his essays were so powerfully written and so eloquently argued that it was just a no-brainer, and he did win that in 2007. Chris is from Washington, D.C. He graduated summa cum laude from Duke University in 1994 and immediately joined Teach for America, where he was sent to Sunflower, Mississippi, and taught elementary school there for 3 years. After an additional year of teaching in South Korea with the Fulbright program, Chris entered graduate school at the University of North Carolina and earned a PhD in American history there in 2005. His dissertation earned the Southern Historical Association's C. Van Woodward Award and was published by the New Press just a few months ago. And the book is titled The Senator and the Sharecropper, James O. Eastland, Fannie Lou Hamer, and the Persistence of Inequality in the South. From grad school onward, Chris has coupled historical scholarship with social entrepreneurship. From 1999 to 2006, he was the director of the Sunflower County Freedom Project, an academic enrichment program for teenagers in rural Mississippi. In 2006, he co-founded the U.S. Public Service Academy, which he'll be discussing today. In addition to the Echoing Green Fellowship, Chris won the Eli Segal Award from AmeriCorps Alumni, and his work has been featured in Time Magazine, NPR, The Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, Christian Science Monitor, and many other places. That's the introduction for Chris. Now a little bit about this series. Can you hear us over there? So we're thrilled to have Chris give what is now going to be an inaugural talk in a new speaker series that we're hoping to call Educators at Google. This series will bring to Google people like Chris, school founders, educational entrepreneurs, online learning theorists, open courseware evangelists, philanthropic and venture capital investors in education, and other innovators and leaders in education. If you're interested in helping to organize this series, please find me afterwards, or Sierra over there in the corner. And if you'd like to find out more about upcoming talks that we're organizing, you can join our mailman group, which is educators-at-Google. One final note about the format. Chris is going to talk for around 20 or 25 minutes. We'll have Q&A for the remaining time, which is an hour. So finally, please join me in welcoming Chris Myers Asch to Google.
Thanks. You said you weren't going to embarrass me. I don't know where you found all that stuff. I'd forgotten half of the stuff. I guess so. You must have used that Google thing. Well, thank you all. I know you all are busy remaking the world, so I appreciate your taking a little bit of time to come and listen to me talk about the Public Service Academy. I want to start with a story, and you can stop me if you've heard it before. You know, a couple guys with this big idea they think is going to change the world, and they start telling people about it, and folks are a little bit cynical at first, or they scoff at them. Folks in the industry are a little worried about this future competition, and but the guys don't get discouraged. They keep persevering, and then eventually, they create this brand new institution. And I'm not talking about Larry and Sergey here at Google, but about myself and my friend Sean Raymond with the U.S. Public Service Academy. Of course, we haven't gotten where you all are yet, but we want to do for the public sector what Google has done for the technology sector, which is to transform it, to rethink it, to change the way we view it and the way we do it. And basically what we want to do, as the brochures tell you, is we want to create a civilian West Point. We want to create a completely new kind of college, a separate institution, independent of any existing college, any existing government program. It would be a 4-year undergraduate degree, degree-granting college that's modeled on the military academies, but focused on civilian service, civilian public service, instead of military service. And that's it. I mean, really what it all comes down to is that idea right there, a civilian counterpart to what we already have in the nation's 5 military service academies. And basically, it's a higher ed startup, and there really aren't that many of these out there. In fact, there aren't any out there. It's not something that people think about when they think about colleges. You know, we think, oh, we've already got Harvard and Stanford, and they've been around forever. And the idea of creating an entirely new college is almost unheard of in higher ed. We do it in K-12 education all the time, you know, with charter schools and all these innovative kind of schools. But people get real conservative and risk-averse when it comes to higher ed. But what we want to do is we want to start up a new college, and this would be focused on. We would have a mission that's different from any existing school. As we talk about here on the slide, we want to transform how young people perceive and prepare for and pursue public service. And when I'm talking about public service, what I mean is not community service, not volunteering at the soup kitchen or helping out with Habitat on a Saturday morning. We're talking about working for public institutions, working for government. At the local, state, and federal levels, everything from the local teachers and cops on the street, at the local level, on up to working for the Border Patrol and FEMA and the State Department at the federal level. And what we find is that there's a perception problem. When excited, talented, bright, energetic young people like the folks in this room think about what they want to do with themselves, what they want to do with their lives, they very rarely nowadays think about going into public service, into the public sector. And that creates all kinds of problems for our country. And I'll elaborate on that later. But what we want to do is we want to develop a whole new generation of young people who see things differently, who think differently about how we can do public service, how government operates. I mean, those of you who I don't know, maybe study political science or know much about how government works, know that government pretty much works the way it worked 50 years ago, and especially at the federal level. It's structured the same way. The rewards are structured the same way. And a lot in the world has changed since then, as you probably know. You've been part of that change. There's a lot there's been revolutions, a couple of revolutions in business and how businesses operate, but that hasn't changed government very much. And we want to develop a whole new generation of young people who think differently about how we can do public service better, how we can make our government institutions, our public institutions, more effective and more efficient and more economical, because our government is quite large. It spends a lot of our money, and it behooves us to make sure that it gets spent well. And that's basically what we want to come out of this U.S. Public Service Academy, that comes out of this new kind of college. When I started out, I thought, hey, I've got this great idea. How I'm so original and creative, and I thought I was all on the cutting edge. And then I did some research, and I found out, well, actually, this goes all the way back to the very beginning of this country, and that George Washington, of all people, had this idea for creating a national public college for civilian leaders. He actually had in mind, he had 2 things in mind. He wanted a military academy that would develop military leaders and a civilian counterpart to develop civilian leaders. And he loved this idea. I mean, he would talk about it to any visitor who came to Mount Vernon, and he left money in his will to create this civilian college. Never happened. The military academy did happen. It happened in 1802 with Thomas Jefferson as president. And Jefferson also wanted to build a civilian counterpart, and he tried when he was president, and Congress wouldn't let him, because they were worried about giving too much power to the national government. And so Jefferson went home to Virginia and built the University of Virginia. And that was his version of what he wanted to do for the nation, a national civilian college. So I wasn't actually very creative at all. It goes back a long way. And we think that it's high time to rekindle that dream and actually make it happen. So you might ask, well, why now? If George Washington couldn't do it, if Thomas Jefferson couldn't do it, what makes me think that I and my friend Sean Raymond, who's been a partner on this project, what makes us think that we could do it now? Well, we think there are a few things that are going on. One is that we have a tremendous need in the public sector. The baby boomers are retiring. We all know, It's on the cover of Newsweek and all these magazines, and everybody's worried about Social Security and all that, and those are important as well. But another thing that's happening is that the public sector is going to be drained of a lot of its leadership and talent when these baby boomers retire. Because what happened was the baby boomers got into public service back in the 1960s, back in the era of, ask not what your country can do for you, right? This idea, this time when people saw public service as something noble and rewarding and prestigious, and people from top colleges would fight for positions in the public sector. Well, that era is long since past. And the pipeline has not been producing enough people to go into the public sector. So as these baby boomers retire, we're already seeing shortages all up and down the local, state, and federal levels all across the country. So you couple that need with the desire of the 9/11 generation. I see lots of folks who look like y'all are part of the 9/11 generation, which studies have shown is much more likely than previous generations, my Generation X, my generation, to go into service-oriented positions. And so you have this desire among young people. You have this tremendous need, but then you have a challenge, because the best and the brightest don't see government as a place to go to make a difference, as a place to go to spend, to make your life worthwhile. Who wants to be a bureaucrat, right? Even that word just conjures up these images of these fuddy-duddies sitting behind desks pushing pencils, right? And that's certainly not the feeling at this campus, where folks are excited and active and thinking of new ideas and very creative. That kind of energy is needed in the public sector. So we need to do something bold, something creative, something new to get those talented young people to go into public service. So that's what we want to do. We want to create this civilian West Point, civilian counterpart to the public service academies. And we're talking about a small college, 5,000 students, 1,300 students a year. It would follow the same admissions process as the military academies, which some of you, I don't know if anybody thought about the military academies back when you were in high school, thought about applying, but you have to get a congressional nomination from your representative or senator. And they basically just write a letter saying, you are who you say you are, you're ready. And then you go through a very competitive admissions process. And actually getting into West Point is harder than getting into Harvard because they get far more applicants. And not only do you have to be good academically, you have to be good physically. And so it's a very competitive process. And we think that the Public Service Academy would be just as competitive, if not more so, because one of the things about the military academies is although they have a single-digit acceptance rate, their application numbers are almost exclusively male. Their applicants are overwhelmingly male. Their student body is only 15% female because young women typically do not apply in very large numbers to the military academies for a variety of reasons. And then if you look at college students, 60% of college students today are women. Then you look at service organizations like Teach for America, which I did, or the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, they're 65, 70% women. So we think that there's going to be a tremendous pool of young people who would want this kind of institution, not only for the free education, but for the mission of serving the country, but doing it in a civilian way. So they'd have to go through this process. We'd look for academic achievement, leadership potential, commitment to service. And when they get there, it would be a different kind of college. It would be very rigorous, like the military academies, year-round. The curriculum would be focused on civic education and international education, academically, as well as service learning. We'd want all students to study abroad and master a foreign language. We feel like that's just one of the things that if you are a 21st century leader, you just have to do. That just should be required. All students would take courses in civics and ethics and economics, whether they're a biology major or an econ major or whatever. In addition to that, there would be an intensive leadership development program modeled on what the military academies do. A lot of folks have these sort of images of what a military academy is, and we think of George Patton, like screaming at a plebe and like slapping him on the head or something. And that's not what goes on there. They have a progressive, and by that I mean a leadership development program that builds from one year to the next, so that by senior year, those students are ready to take on the leadership of a platoon. And so they have a whole system set up, and we're actually working with the folks primarily at West Point, but also at Naval Academy and Air Force Academy, to create a civilian model, a civilian parallel to what goes on there. Students would have a liberal arts major like history or biology, but they'd also choose a field, a public service field like public health or law enforcement or education. And then they would do internships and coursework in that field. And then when they graduate, they would owe 5 years of service. So that's the deal. You get a free education, you graduate debt-free, but you owe 5 years of service. In the military academies, of course, you get sent to serve in the Army or the Air Force and so forth. Here, you would be sent to serve in a public institution, a government position, local, state, or federal. And you would serve for 5 years. And that could be broken up. There would be a 2-year mandatory service commitment where you go wherever you're told. And then after 2 years, you could apply for a transfer. You could defer the last 3 years and go to graduate school. Or you could stay on if you're in a position that you really like. And so that's the essence of it. And we feel that these students would be better equipped to deal with the challenges of public service after having gone to the Public Service Academy. It would be a very different kind of college experience. It's not going to be for everybody. We recognize that. You know, there are 3,000 some odd colleges in this country, and students who wouldn't fit in here would fit in somewhere else very well. But we think the intensity and the rigor of this campus would create a culture of service that, like the military academies, creates a bond among students that's very powerful and much more powerful than what happens on most civilian colleges. You know, the unique curriculum focused on leadership and service will develop leaders in a different kind of way than most civilian institutions or any civilian institutions do now. There's a longer commitment to serve. You know, a lot of times people who run colleges, you know, college president will say, "Oh, you know, we already do all that stuff, Chris. You don't need a public service academy. You know, we do this at Duke. You know, that's where I went. You know, and they'll say, "Oh, we already have the public service academy at Duke." And I'll say, "Well, really, because I don't know of any program that requires you to serve for 5 years after you're done. I don't know of any program that's focused on leadership and service the way the Public Service Academy would be. I don't know of any program that's specifically designed to meet the needs of the public sector the way the Public Service Academy would be, because it's not. Because in most colleges, when you say public service, they really mean community service. They really mean nonprofit organizations. I got nothing against nonprofits. You know, I run one now. I ran one in Mississippi. But they don't do what the public sector does. I mean, there's certain things that government has to do, that government must do, and must do well, and isn't doing as well as it should. And that's why we need a public service academy. And plus, when you have a national college, like a West Point or a Naval Academy, it automatically raises the visibility and the prestige of that field. And that's what we want to do. Because, you know, obviously 5,000 students, 1,200 graduates a year is not enough to meet all the needs of our country. But what it can do is inspire young people around the country to see public service in a different way. To say to themselves, well, you know, I may not go to the Public Service Academy. I may be going to Berkeley or somewhere. But that's a field I want to go into. And it changes the way they think about their future and the way they think about public service. Now, obviously, I can say all this, you know, and say, oh, there's a lot of young people out there who really like this idea. And people would say, oh, well, how do you know? And so we commissioned a poll. We've actually done a number of internal polls, but we did this external poll. We had this firm just ask 800 young people, 18 to 29, what they thought. They gave them the brochure, you know, the basic outline of what this idea was, and said, what do you think? And so 88% said, that's great. You know, what a great idea. And then we said, okay, well, now we're going to give you every argument we've heard against the Public Service Academy. Oh, you know, it's too much money. Oh, we should do scholarships instead. Oh, we already do this at existing colleges. Oh, you know, this is just going to become a political, you know, a political time bomb or, you know, it's going to be manipulated politically. You know, every argument we could think of. And then we asked them the same question again. And we got a little bit of a decrease, but still 77% of young people supported the idea. So there is a groundswell of support. And then we asked, well, okay, if this had been around when you were applying to college, would you have considered it? Would this have been appealing to you? And the majority said they likely would have. 19% very likely and 37% somewhat likely to have considered going to this college. And so what that says to us, and it's not Democratic or Republican, it's pretty much evenly spaced out. What that says to us is that young people are looking for this kind of opportunity. Not everybody, certainly, but many young people want to serve the country. Matt was saying, he gets fired up when he sees the be all you can be Army ads and the things that appeal to patriotism and that kind of thing. But you don't want to necessarily go into the military. You don't necessarily want to kill people, right? But you still want to serve. You still want to do something for your country. You still want to be part of something larger than yourself. And so we think that there are going to be a lot of young people who would be really excited about this kind of institution. And the numbers bear that out. It's going to cost money, a lot of money. I guess, in Google terms, it's probably not a lot of money, $205 million. But it is a significant investment, and we don't shy away from it. It's going to cost a lot of money to build this institution and keep it running at a top level for years and years to come. We're looking at creating a public-private partnership where the federal government pays for 80% of it, and we're looking for funders to build an endowment fund. Right now, the organization as it exists is a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. We depend on foundation grants, like Matt mentioned, Echoing Green and Kellogg Foundation. We have hundreds of individual donors, people who've signed our petition, gone to our website, or heard me speak, or read about us in Time or wherever, and have just sent in $50, $100, $1,000 to keep us going, to help us hire interns and fly to places like this, to speak about this idea and to generate more support. And what's interesting, a couple years ago, I was living in rural Mississippi in the middle of nowhere, had this idea, started sending it around to anybody I could think of, and now we have a bill in Congress. We have 20 senators who are co-sponsors. Our primary co-sponsor was, the first one was Hillary Clinton, who'd read about us in the Washington Post and basically called us up, had her staff call us up and say, look, this is a great idea, let's do it. And so we have, and we have, it's mostly Democrats, I'll be honest, but it is bipartisan. We have 3 Republican senators of the 20, and then we have 116 representatives also as co-sponsors of the bill. Again, bipartisan. And we've got organizations from, everything from City Year to the Peace Corps Association to the Urban League, as well as college presidents. I was just meeting Don Kennedy, who used to be president of Stanford. He's one of our endorsers, and a number of college presidents, including the last 3 superintendents of West Point. So it runs the gamut. Anytime you have West Point and the presidents or superintendents of West Point and the former president of Antioch University supporting the same thing, that says that you're pretty bipartisan and ideologically broad. So we do get a lot of support. It is broadly based. It's not ideological because people see in this the potential to create something new and different and uniquely American, and I think that's exciting. And so, I'm here to just tell you about it, solicit your support. I know that Ilana wanted me to talk about action items, things that you can do, and there's any number of things that you can do. This movement would not have gone as far as it has if it had just been me or Sean and me together. We've had volunteers who volunteered their time, people who volunteered to design our website, people who volunteered to get us hooked up with a particular organization, people who have gone to their college president and harassed him until he endorsed us, people who've written their senators and representatives, people who've donated money, people who've done any number of things to help make this happen. And so we would love to have many of you all involved. You can start by signing our petition and that gets you on the mailing list for our e-newsletter. But also talking to your representatives, talking to other people in your family about this idea. Supporting us financially is, of course, always important. And also lending your expertise. There are a lot of things we don't know how to do. I'm not a techie, you know, I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to do a lot of the things that we would love to do online. You know, we've had a lot of success with some of the social networking sites in terms of getting young people involved. We have a National Youth Council with a couple hundred college students who are organizing on their campuses nationwide to get more of a groundswell of support. You know, so we've done a lot of the stuff online, but we need to do more because that's where the action is. We couldn't have done anything without Google, you know, but without the internet, without the ability to connect with people cheaply. Because honestly, you know, I was in Mississippi earning less than $30,000 a year. I couldn't have done this without the internet being, you know, allowing me to send this proposal out to thousands of people for free. You know, so we need all kinds of help. So I'll leave it at that. That's the basic story. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Yes.
So when I think of the military, I think of officers coming out of
Sorry. Yeah, I guess for folks who may want to hear.
So when I think of the... Is this on? It's on. Okay.
It's on.
So when I think of the military, I think of officers coming out of the academies, maybe ROTC programs, and there's also a distinction between officers and enlisted. Do you think a public service academy will bring this type of distinction to the public sector as well? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and there is a distinction because the military is much more rank oriented than the public sector is. But what we want to bring is a sense that public service academy graduates are kind of a cut above, you know, that you can expect more out of them, not in an elitist way, but in a way of cultivating excellence, and that what that will do is kind of act like yeast in the loaf, you know, that having, you know, a core of these young people who have these values, who have this experience, going out into our public sector, over time, they'll raise the level of expectation among all the people, you know, around them. So less of a rank distinction between, you know, officers and enlisted, because that's not built into the public system, to the civilian system, but more kind of a hierarchy of talent in a sense, you know, or of ability and experience, and that we want to raise the level of other people around them up as well, if that makes sense. Yes, in the back.
So if you were to get all of the money that you needed to start the academy and push through the first 4 years of students, what's the timeline for planning the curriculum, getting on board faculty, creating a campus? How much planning has gone into that so far, and what are your visions for the future?
It's great. It's a great question. And we kind of came up with this after it kind of took off, and Senator Clinton and Senator Specter got on board, and suddenly we were like, well, wait a minute. What if this actually happens? You know, what if Congress passed the bill tomorrow? What would we do? And so back in fall of 2006, I just started cold calling professors. You know, I'd read about somebody who was an expert in international education. I'd be on the phone and be like, hey, you know, explain the idea in 10 seconds. Be like, I need you to serve on a task force for me, you know, to serve on this task force on international education or admissions and curriculum and all these different things. So we cobbled together about 60, 70 of these experts in higher ed to serve on different task forces, and they came up with their various reports. We had a conference. We argued it out for about 3 days up in Wisconsin. It was all snowy. It was great. They couldn't leave. We just argued all weekend long. And out of that came our first draft of a blueprint. And that's kind of a longer look. My original proposal was maybe 13 pages or something. And this is about 50, 60 pages. It kind of lays out what the curriculum would look like, how the placement process would work, how admissions would work, what the time frame is in terms of hiring people and so forth. And now we're in the process of revising that to make it much more detailed about especially about timeline. The bill calls for a 2-year startup window from the time the bill is passed to the time the first freshmen step on campus. 2 years is not a lot of time. So what we want to happen is when Congress passes that bill, and ideally that would happen next year when the new president comes in and the new Congress comes in. So let's say at this time next year the bill is passed. We want to present with them this blueprint to say, look, you can start at square one with nothing, or you can start with this blueprint that now hundreds of people have looked at and vetted and offered feedback on, and we could really hit the ground running. So that's what we're working on right now. We want the second draft to be out this fall. Yes?
Hi, I was wondering what the plan is for enforcing the service period.
Mm-hmm. How do you enforce the service period? Well, it's called money. Because if a student were to break the commitment and not serve the 5 years, they would owe the entire cost of their 4-year education all at once. So that's a pretty hefty bill to be stuck with if they decide, oh, I'm tired of this or whatever. You do need enforcement mechanisms, and that's a pretty stiff one if they have to pay that all back at once.
And there's no plan, for example, for, let's say, someone served 2 years and wanted to go out. Would they still have to pay back the full amount?
They would pay back the full amount. I think starting at 4 years, I have to read the bill closely again. I wanted to give you the wrong numbers. Starting at 4 years, if they finish 4 years, there's some deduction, but not much, because you want to make it a serious disincentive. Otherwise, you'd get people going through, especially college costs being what they are today, going through maybe doing a year and then and cutting out. Obviously, we hope that we would have instilled the values and the sense of obligation, but the financial disincentive, it doesn't hurt either in terms of keeping people to their commitment.
So this is actually kind of a question on the same lines, but. So I think when you talk about military academies like West Point, then it's pretty clear that the kind of people who are going into that are expecting, for the most part, to pursue a career in the military. And part of that is because the military, for people who have graduated from places like West Point and who are interested in that sort of thing, offers like a really good career path. And I would venture to say that maybe the public bureaucracy doesn't have the infrastructure that sort of supports that same sort of attractive career path because of how bureaucratic it is. And I mean, the kind of people that would go to that are not the same kind of people that would go to a military academy. I think what you're suggesting is you're hoping it's the same kind of people that might try and get into Harvard or Stanford or whatever. And so what kind of relationship, if any, is there with the public, with the actual public sector in preparing for sort of accepting those sort of people? I mean, because I imagine that the idea is not to just have them stay on for 5 years and then that's it, and just rely on having 1,300 people every 5 years but to have them have prolonged careers in that sector.
You're exactly right. I mean, the goal would be to have career leaders in the public sector, just like the goal of West Point isn't 5 years; it's a career in the military. And you're right that there isn't the same easily discernible career path the way there is in the military. And there are a couple things that we want to do. First of all, on the front end, we want to create partnerships with the employing agencies so that we're not just kind of willy-nilly, throwing one person here, one person there, but that we actually develop relationships with these agencies and then have them request, certain numbers. And it's a two-way street. They get a top quality graduate, but they need to provide mentorship and professional development and leadership opportunities early on. They need to provide something that's going to be attractive and appealing for the graduate as well. And so that will invest the graduate, the young person, more in the development of themselves as a career public servant. At the same time, though, part of what we want to do is change that culture. Because I think you're right. I think that in a lot of public bureaucracies there isn't an awareness of leadership development and professional development and just ongoing learning and that kind of thing. The way the military does quite well, actually. I mean, even if you've been there 10 or 15 years, they'll send you off to some school for additional training, or they'll send you to another place for something else because they see this process as continuous. And so what we want to do is try and transform the public bureaucracies from within, to raise the level of expectation by having these young people who have these different expectations come in and help push those changes. It's a long-term process, though. In the first few classes, there's going to be some tension, some struggle.
I have one more, hopefully
Sure.
a little bit more difficult question. So you showed a really pretty graph of that quite clearly showed that at least young people are very supportive of the sort of initiative, but about 4 years ago, over 50% of the country was very supportive of George Bush. And some people might disagree with how successful that was. And so I'm wondering if there's any sort of metric that you have available or that you're planning on having on measuring sort of the probability that this is actually a successful venture, especially in the face of the fact that this country has a very real problem with affordable higher education, and that this is maybe only 1% of the budget, but still 1% of the budget that's going to an experimental school versus 1% of the budget extra that could be going to making higher education more affordable for the general population and not for just $1,300 a year.
Sure. Well, one thing is that I use that stat about the 1% just to show that in the overall analysis it's not a huge number, but we wouldn't be taking the money out of the higher ed pile. So $200 million
well,
doesn't necessarily...
implicitly you would, because that is money that's going to higher education and that could potentially go to other to support other initiatives in higher
education. Except that we wouldn't be going through the Department of Education budget. We'd be getting the money from actually the Department of Homeland Security budget. Okay. So we wouldn't be competing necessarily. But your larger point is a good one, which is how do we know that this is going to work? How did Larry and Sergey know 10 years ago that Google was going to work? Well, they didn't. They had a plan. They thought things through as clearly as they could. But ultimately, they had to take a leap of faith. They had to take a risk. I mean, that's what entrepreneurship is. And ultimately, that's what we're asking for as well, to take a leap of faith, to say there is a better way to do this, and we need to go all in. We need to just go and pursue this. We can't try to do these half-hearted measures or these simple, like mini pilot programs, because that won't change the culture. And so the short answer is no. We don't have a metric. Anecdotally, the thing I like to think of is back 45 years ago when John Kennedy was thinking about starting the Peace Corps, he turned it over to his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, who's really the father of the Peace Corps. Kennedy gets all the credit. But Sergeant Shriver was the one who was in charge of trying to take this little idea that Kennedy just kind of tossed out in the middle of a speech and actually turn it into a reality. And so the first thing he did, he talked to all the experts, all the higher ed people, all the international relations people, State Department people, all these people to try to figure out, well, how could this Peace Corps idea work? And almost all of them came back with the same answer. And they said, well, it's really risky. It's a dangerous world out there. It's the Cold War, Berlin Wall had just gone up and everything. And they said, you got to start small. Take a handful of kids, maybe 25, 40 kids, pick one country where you can develop relationships, send them all to that one country for a couple years, and then, go back to Congress, ask for a little more money, get a few more kids, and so forth. And he's like, you're crazy. Because if we did that, nobody in the world would ever hear of the Peace Corps again. It would be stuck in the bowels of the federal bureaucracy. Nobody would ever know about it. And it wouldn't inspire a generation. He said, no, you got to go. You got to do it big. You have to get hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. You've got to get dozens of countries. And you have to make this kind of a bold American venture that says who we are as a people. We're risk takers. We're pioneers. We try new things. We fail sometimes, but we often succeed. And so he said, the Peace Corps has got to be like that. So we're going to start with hundreds of kids. And they had no budget. They hadn't even gotten congressional approval when he started sending recruiters out to college campuses. But it worked. And within a couple of years, he had thousands of kids and 40, 50 countries. And now, it's all over the world. So that's the inspiration that we look at to say, you know what, we need to just do this. And when we start down that road, we're gonna encounter some obstacles and roadblocks, but we'll overcome them because we have the energy and we have the foresight and we have the passion to make it happen. There's someone in the back. She's got her hand up.
Hi. So I was wondering whether or not you had considered other models, like instead of having a school, having programs within lots of schools, like a program within lots of networks of colleges, and having, I guess, maybe something like the Truman Scholarship, where, it's like a program that you're tracked through for 4 years and you still have the community, but that could potentially have a greater impact because you would be influencing your peers around you at the other colleges.
Sure. Quick show of hands. How many of you know the Truman Scholarship? About half. Truman Scholarship's been around for 40, 50 years. I love the Truman Scholarship. In fact, 2 of our interns this summer were Truman Scholars. The Truman Scholar class of 2007 wrote the big, long statement of support for the Public Service Academy. I think Truman Scholarship is a great idea. It does not have the cultural resonance or the impact that West Point has. You know, everybody in this room knows what West Point is and probably has an image in their mind of what it means and what kind of student goes there. Because when you have an institution, when you build something permanent, when you have alumni who are tied to that place, it creates a different kind of bond and a different kind of impact. I think the Truman Scholarship is great. I did a Fulbright scholarship. It doesn't have the same kind of impact that an institution would. It just can't. And so we did look at other models, and some people say, well, what about the ROTC model as opposed to the military academy model? And ultimately, that would be a great thing to have, I think. But try to imagine having ROTC without having the academies. It's hard because the academies are kind of the core. They're kind of the keeper of the values and the keeper of the traditions. And then once you have that flagship institution, that model, you can implement ROTC programs on a variety of different campuses and still maintain the quality and the integrity of the programs. If you don't have that core, then those programs will scatter. And people will have different definitions of what public service is, different definitions of what obligation and commitment are, and different levels of quality. And so we think it would be the best thing to do would be to create the flagship institution, create the model, create the place that Congress won't be able to change later on when an administration changes. Once you build that place, you can't get rid of it. And then once you have that, later on, once the model is established, then you can create the satellite programs at existing institutions. And so long-term down the road, that's definitely something we would like to do. But we think this is a big enough piece right now to handle.
I also have one more question about whether or not you have an idea of what percentage of the graduates you want to go into local versus national versus state public service.
We don't know, honestly, what that breakdown would be. I mean, there's some folks who are passionately interested in federal service, other folks who would really much more rather be on the local level, but we don't have a sense of that breakdown. It'll make its way back up.
Just a quick question about why Homeland Security is the sponsor of this. That just seems like an odd place for this if we're trying to separate it from being part of the military, say, or some other.
That is a great question. It's not in our proposal. That's a political decision. Basically, what happened is that what's happening now because of the deficit and the wars, there are only two places in the federal government that actually have money and have programs that are being funded: the military, Defense Department, and Homeland Security. Everywhere else is being cut, and substantially cut.
I think that's part of the problem.
I think that you're absolutely right. When we were going to reintroduce the bill, and one of the things that we are going to talk with the writers of the bill, Senator Clinton and Senator Specter, is to say we would prefer not to be in Homeland Security. We think this fits better as an independent executive agency. The difficulty is that if you don't have a home, you need a home in the federal government within one of the departments, so you have to be affiliated somewhere. Your money's got to come from somewhere. We don't want to be affiliated with the Department of Education because we don't want to compete with money-wise with existing programs. As we were talking about before, we don't want to take away from Pell Grants or any other programs that are already being challenged for funding. So that's why it was a political decision. Bring it back up here. Thanks.
So I can see why a $200 million line item on a budget would be sort of a blocking issue for getting political support and sort of having people rally behind it. And I wonder if there's been any discussion about trying to mitigate that cost and distribute it amongst other government agencies who are already trying to invest in higher education outreach programs. I know like DHS, the military, Department of State, all have budgets that they allocate toward trying to recruit students from universities to begin with. Right. And they have a lot of subject matter experts who might be able to contribute to the curriculum, do tenures as professors or act in some sort of supporting role at a public service academy. Has there been any discussion of trying to lower that line item cost and incorporate it into the budgets of the institutions that would be benefiting from this program?
There is. One model is there's something called the Presidential Management Fellowship, which does that, where where it's basically for graduate students. It tries to get graduate students to come in for 2 years, top graduate students to come into the federal service for 2 years, and the employing agency has to pony up a certain amount of money for each PMF person that they get. So we've looked into that. That sometimes causes antagonism within those agencies. The other thing that we're looking at is what's called the Interagency Personnel Act, IPA, which is, I never heard about it before, but basically what it allows for high-level senior executive service people to be detailed to an educational institution for 1 to 4 years. And that would be a great way for us to kind of cut down on faculty costs by having them come for 3 or 4 years, serve as faculty members. And these folks are experts. I mean, they're PhDs in their field. They've had 20, 30 years of experience. They're top people. So that would be a way to kind of mitigate the actual hard money costs, because their salaries are already paid by their employing agency. Yes.
So the one big worry that was kind of going through my mind this whole time, and it was especially aggravated by the whole Department of Homeland Security being the financier of the project. I'm just wondering what happens when you have an educational institution that's so closely tied to government and patriotism and a sense of nationalism that, given what already sort of happens to a large degree in public schools around the country, high schools even, how do you make sure that the curriculum, that the educational experience isn't distorted or restricted based on that?
No, I'm not going to pretend like there's any formula that we'll have. I mean, basically what we need to do is we need to create a firewall between the operation of the school and the people who fund the school. It happens in public schools. I went to University of North Carolina, and every year there was some wacko in the state legislature who was upset by something going on in Chapel Hill and wanted to do something about it. And you have to build up you have to strengthen the tradition of academic freedom. You have to incorporate that contractually. You have to make sure that is a well understood part of this public service academy, and that people in Congress cannot and will not have any say over hiring of faculty, determination of curriculum, and so forth. That's not to say that it won't happen, that people will create an uproar. But one of the things that we're doing is creating strong ties with the military academies, who have been very supportive of our efforts so far, and to kind of jump on their tradition of academic independence. People in Congress don't go up to West Point and say, "Hey, man, you guys need to be teaching this or that." They have academic independence, and it wasn't always that way. It took them a while to build that up. It took about 50 years, in fact. But now it's a tradition that Congress understands you can't mess with curriculum and faculty and stuff at the military academies. We want to build on that tradition to kind of hop in there and say, well, just like you wouldn't tell West Point what to do, you can't tell us what to do. I think what's really going to have to be strong from the beginning, from the superintendent, the head of the university on down, especially with that first president and the first charter faculty, is to really emphasize that, to say this is an academic institution. It's a free market of ideas. Lots of things will be taught here and will be said here and will be debated here that maybe wouldn't fly in Congress or in the political system, but that's because it's an educational institution. So that just needs to be a value up front and re-emphasized every opportunity. But I'm not going to pretend it won't be a problem, because it's a problem in any state system.
So one big difference between the public service academy and the military academies is that the military academies are, one, gets funded by the military, and also people will stay on the military. So essentially, the same institution that's running the program is the one where people are going to be working at. Whereas in this case, you have people coming out of the public service academy and going into many different institutions, right? So, I mean, one of the things is, as it pertains to curriculum, the military has freedom to set the curriculum, but they're basing it on their needs, right? Now, the needs for the institutions that are going to be hiring these people are very different. So, so I think that's one challenge. But essentially, my question is, what's the plan for integration between the academy and the institutions that are going to be in some sense, hiring these people, because for one, people that are coming into the academy are going to want to have good jobs and have some sense of even security after they're coming out, and perhaps even they might already envision, one of the one institution that they might want to go into, whether it's the police department or whether it's something else. Right. But the challenge might be that, at the end, they might not be able to go into those positions, because it's not as clear cut as the military academy, where for sure that you're staying within the same institution, right? So what's the plan for this integration?
I think you're absolutely right. Although what's interesting is that at the military academies, it's much more of a broad-based curriculum. I mean, they're basically engineering schools, and all the students get essentially an engineering education. And a lot of their specialties don't happen until after they graduate. Somebody who graduates from West Point and wants to go into intelligence, they haven't had necessarily a whole lot of intelligence background as an undergrad. They're going to get that specialized training whatever base they go to. Same thing, artillery, infantry, whatever. A lot of that specialized training happens afterward. What happens more at the service academies, in addition to the engineering background, is the leadership and the character development, the character formation that is transferable no matter which course they wind up choosing. Because a lot of times they may go in hoping for one particular branch, and then they wind up, because of shifting needs, they have to go somewhere else. But their skills, their leadership skills are transferable. In terms of employing agencies involved earlier on, that's where a lot of the internships come in, and the public service concentration. Those when a student chooses that field, they can start to get coursework and internships in that particular field. And we would love to collaborate with the eventual employing agencies. That's why we want to develop relationships and partnerships from the very beginning. We'll have basically 6 years. From the time the bill is passed, we have 2 years, and then first freshmen come on, then it's 4 years till they graduate. So we have 6 years to really kind of cultivate some relationships so we can figure out how best to meet their needs without distorting the undergraduate experience. Other questions? Okay, I don't know if wow, I have 3 o'clock just about on the nose. So, well, thank you all for sitting and taking your time.